Hello, my name is Colton River and I'm an aspiring musician and music lover. And I don't remember what I was doing after that. There are timestamps in the description, so if you want to just skip past all of this, blabbering, or there's stuff that you don't really need to know about or you already understand, you can just skip to the part that you want to look at. I've been saving money for my dream studio for quite some time, and I finally, with a little bit of help from Christmas, got to a point where I could buy at least the guitar parts. This isn't a video about all the things that I bought or all the things that I changed in my guitar, but it is a video about one of the pieces of equipment I did buy. I bought this. That is the Line 6 Helix LT. It's definitely a jack of all trades, but it still sounds pretty good. In fact, I would say in a mix or in a live situation, I would be hard pressed to believe that anybody could tell the difference between the Helix and then a full analog setup. I don't believe that. It actually seems like an invaluable tool for someone doing production of different genres. Now, at first with the Helix, I didn't read the manual, I'll be honest. I figured I've had modelers in the past, how hard could it be? It's supposed to be super intuitive. I was like, I'll just watch some YouTube videos. But a lot of them assume that you have a lot of knowledge about the Helix to begin with, and it's not what I would call the most intuitive machine. Maybe I'm just dumb, and that's, believe me, entirely possible. So I ended up just reading the manual and figuring most of this out myself. So I'm gonna go over through just the basic stuff, try not to make this like super long or intense. If you're looking for like in-depth how to use HX Edit, this is not the video that you want. This is like, I bought a Helix, the fuck? And then I don't want to read the manual. So when you first get the Helix, you're going to see this screen here, which just has the different presets that are set in it, all that fun stuff. I prefer to go to this mode here, which is what they call signal chain mode. That kind of gives me a better idea of what's in the signal chain and if I want to take it out or edit it or that kind of stuff. But either way, anytime you press a corresponding button, it will go to the corresponding preset. So if we're in this mode here, it goes like this, so on and so forth. Let's talk about the different foot switching modes we have in the Helix and what those do and how those work. So right out of the box you have this one, and you can actually hit mode here and go into stompbox mode. You'll see all these different things change to different colors. In that mode, I do find that this view is a little more helpful than this one because it doesn't really tell you what they do. You can see them turn on and off, but this one here shows me that's my room reverb, on, off, screamer, on, off, so on and so forth. Okay, so there's one more mode that you can use as a foot switcher in this, and probably the one I use the most and that I find the most useful. So if you hit both of these together, it goes into snapshot mode. Now, you'll see here, you can click your individual snapshot and it'll go to that snapshot. You can see that right here. But if I want to go back, it goes right into the stomp mode, okay? Now, there's actually a way you can change it so that it stays in snapshot mode, and I find that to be by far the most useful for a couple of reasons. One, when you're using it, if you try to switch to a different preset, there's a minute little space in it where it's like, it kind of blanks out and then comes back in. It's not super noticeable if you're doing it in the studio, but if you were doing it live, it would be massively noticeable. You can't add or remove blocks by changing presets, or snapshots with your foot, but you just add all the blocks you could possibly want for that set or section or session or whatever, and then toggle them on and off with the snapshots. I find this to be the most applicable live, but it works in the studio too because of the zero latency. Probably the way I use the Helix the most. So I'll show that here in a second because there's actually a little trick to making sure it stays in snapshot mode. So normally we hit this, and okay, we're snapshot, we want snapshot 1. There we go, but now we're back in this other mode. Okay, so if you go to global settings, which global settings is in here, you click on this, and then you see right here it says snapshot mode switches auto return. Flip that to manual return and then go back to your beginning. Now if we go into this mode, now we just switch snapshots. So let's go to 1 and let's take a look at some snapshot 1. So snapshot 1, let's say we want the reverb off for snapshot 1. So we bypass that reverb and then we hit save. Okay, and sure, that's fine. And then we go back into snapshot mode here, and we hit, let's say 5. Okay, and now we'll go back there and look, reverb is off. So let's go ahead and turn that on. Let's save. Boom. Okay. Now, when we go into snapshot mode, if we're on 1, it should be off. And when we go to 5, it should be on. There we go. Basically you can say, okay, snapshot 1 is my clean intro, 2 is my crunch rhythm, 3 is my lead sound, or however you want to do it. And then you can add different things for that. You can add effects, you know, clean with reverb, clean without reverb, etc., etc. I find the most applicable way to use this is to set up maybe each bank section as a song and then switch to the preset mode and just, you know, bop through the song. So the next thing I wanted to talk about was signal chain and the different ways to use the Helix in that signal chain. The first thing I want to talk about is how to think about the Helix. Think of it like an amp. It has a preamp section, it has a power amp section, and it has an effects loop. But you can control to send any of those blocks to or from any of those parts. So it can get kind of complicated, but let me explain just a couple of ways to use it. So the easiest way to do this first is to take the Helix as a mono signal from your guitar to the Helix input, and mono out from the mono side, which is left on the 1/4 inch out on the Helix, into whatever. But this is going to be true whether it's a DAW, a PA system, an FRFR speaker. Is that speaker? Yeah, that's right. Any one of those things, you can do a mono in to a mono out. So right here I've got it on this rectifier. I'll turn this on so you can hear it. Pretty simple stuff. You're going to get just the Helix and all the little, you know, bits of the Helix. You can set up effects loops on that. I don't think it's super necessary for that type of a setup, but it's something be aware you can do. Now, you can do the same thing in stereo, which is actually how I have it set up here. You'll hear it's the same sound. This is really useful if you're doing stereo effects, like a kind of like rotary vibe thing or some kind of like stereo flanger or something like that. Other than that, I don't see a lot of difference in the two, and so I wouldn't probably get too involved in that. Alright, so that method can also be used as the mono method from the first part can also be used into the front of an amp. So just keep in mind, if you're going to do that, all of this stuff is going to go before the preamp section of your amp, because you're coming out of this. So you're going from guitar into the Helix, Helix out to the amp, and then amp to the, it's all of its stuff, and then, you know, it goes out to the speaker. By the way, if you're going to use the Helix as a standalone, which you can, it's fine for that, it sounds fine. Get an FRFR speaker. It's going to be massively better than trying to run it through other things. It's so hard to play guitar, like, right tight up against this. Now in the front of the amp, you want to be careful. If you're hitting the front of the amp with a bunch of time-based effects right before the preamp stage, it's going to sound weird. Everybody knows that. That's why we have effects loops, etc., etc. Can you do it? Yeah. Is it like a hard, fast rule? Sort of, but you can do whatever you want. Whatever you think sounds cool. But if you want more traditional sound and more traditional control, you're going to have to use the effects loop. And that's where we get into the 4-cable method, and that's where things got super confusing for me. I'll put a diagram up, but I want to explain the idea of the signal chain so that you understand where everything's going, so you're not just plugging in based on this thing. And that's really what precipitated me making this video to begin with. The idea here is we want to take the guitar to the Helix and the part of the Helix to part of the amp, and then the rest of it to come back out to the Helix and then back to the amp and then to the speaker. So to me it was confusing. Like, you could just follow, you know, whatever those videos are that say do this and then that, so A to B to C to D, but then you don't really understand why. And I feel like when you don't understand why, where the signal's going and why it's going where it's going, you don't really get the ability then to edit it and to do what you want with it. Okay, so in here I've got my multi in, okay, and you can see here that this is the input multi. The guitar Varix, it doesn't matter. You can do just guitar. And then I have a set of blocks. I've got a compressor, I've got a noise gate, and then a distortion pedal. And those are all going to hit the beginning of the amp. So it's going to go from the guitar into the Helix, right here, into the Helix. It's then going to hit these three things, and then I send it out through send one, okay? Send one then, logically, has to go into the front part of the amplifier. Once it hits my preamp section of my amp, it goes in, gets preamped and EQ'd, and then it goes to the effects send. From the effects send of the amp, I go back in to the return of the Helix. And then that's return one here, you can see. So from the return of the Helix, then I hit the time-based effects, so delay and reverb, okay? And then I send it back out through the quarter-inch output to the return of the amp effects loop, and then that goes into the power section of the amp and then out to the speaker. So it's kind of a convoluted way to do it. It sounds more complicated than it really is, but nobody really explains this. That means you're utilizing both all of the amp's features as well as all of the Helix's features in total, and you're separating them out. Now, the reason I showed you on here how I do it on HX Edit is because it gives you an idea of how much control you really have. You can send that stuff anywhere you want, and that's just kind of setting it up like two amps talking to each other. There is one more way that you can use the Helix with an amp. You can actually use your Helix with just the power section of your amp. So forget your amp's EQing and all that fun stuff. It just goes in the power section and then goes out to the speaker. Now, there's still some coloring of sound with your amp, not nearly as much as if it went to the preamp section, but this allows you to do some interesting things. So, for example, you can take your, just like the mono method, the first method I talked about, the mono to mono method, you can go guitar in to the Helix, out from the output, and then into the return of your amp's effects loop. This effectively bypasses all of the preamp section altogether. And then you can use that, I hope that's right, to use your amp's power amp section to push what the Helix does. Now, you probably don't want to use cabinets. You could use an amp, model, and then all the effects you want, in whatever order you want, to just hit the power section of your amp and then out to the speaker, okay? One thing I would very much caution you to do is you don't have, just the amps I have at least, maybe I'm wrong about this, there might be other amps that do, I don't have any control over the power section. It just pushes whatever you put into it. Start with your master volume on your Helix way, way, way down, and then bring it up slowly until you get the desired volume you want. You can also control that in HX Edit. So in HX Edit, you can actually go in and go to the output, and you can bring the output down or up based on where you're at. And that's probably a really good place to start. And then maybe kind of start at 0 and move your way up in your power section, especially if you have a really, really loud and powerful amp. Like if you're running a half stack or a quarter stack or something like that, you may not want to blast your power section of your amp with full-on volume in the Helix, so be super careful with that. Okay, the last thing I want to talk about is the Helix as a recording interface. If you go in here, and we got our inputs, this is just my standard inputs for my Focusrite something or other. So as long as the Helix is plugged into your computer, you can actually go into here and go into Preferences, go into Audio, and you can actually pick the output device to the Line 6 Helix LT. So you can see that here is an option, as well as the input device, okay? I'm not gonna get deep into this for a couple of reasons. Mainly because I don't use it to do that. I have already invested in DI boxes and reamping, and that's primarily what you're going to be using it for. There's inputs for MIDI on here, there's inputs on the bigger one. You can actually, it has a microphone preamp apparently too. I don't think that's super necessary, especially if you have an interface already. You can use it to record whatever patch you set up in the Helix and all that fun stuff. You can also, at the same time, take a DI track out of there. I think it's input 5 or 6, but I'll correct myself and put it up here somewhere. If I'm wrong, I'm probably wrong. So you can do that, and then you can actually reamp in the Helix, and you go from your your track you've taken as your DI, you set the output to another input on the Helix, which I think is maybe 7/8. I'll again correct myself if I'm wrong, and then you can send it back through a different patch if you didn't like that one, or you can tweak it. You can spend all day tweaking it. It's really awesome for that. There's a bunch of videos on that, so I'm not going to go into that, but know that you can do that too. Now, as somebody who already invested in DI boxes and reamping boxes, which aren't very expensive to begin with, I find that to be something I'm not that interested in. So what I primarily do with the Helix is I'll use it to record sounds that I want while I record a DI. I'll usually take the guitar into the DI box into my interface, and then from the pass-through on the DI box I take into the Helix, and then put that mono into the interface as well. That way I can get an idea of kind of what it sounds like when I'm recording, you know, what I want. And then later I almost always reamp, just because it's a lot easier for me to get the idea on tape and then play with the sounds later than it is to try to get the sound right, and then sometimes maybe I lose the idea or the motivation or what I had in the first place. If I were starting from scratch, like I was building a guitar-centric studio from scratch, I would probably buy a guitar and a Helix and a recording interface, and I would probably use the DI capture from the Helix. It's just one less thing you have to buy, and you're going to have that anyway, so why not use it? Again, if I'm looking to get the best signal possible, I feel like the DI box is probably a better investment because they're not very expensive. You know, that's for people smarter than me to figure out and debate. Okay, so the last part I wanted to talk about was making your own presets, and this can get super involved. I'm not going to get super involved. I'm just going to show you basically what you can do and what they are and all that fun stuff. So you'll notice this is one I really like. This is that came with the Helix. This is a dual rectifier clone, basically. You'll notice there's like a path here, and it goes out here, and it's like, what's all this stuff, and blah, 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 blah. Well, this is actually a really good example, too, of how to use different paths easily inside of the Helix, okay? So, you can see here we've got a noise gate, a volume, you know, pedal option, so you can up and down that. Yeah, boop, 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 boop. And then also you have your amp here, okay? Then you have two different paths here. So you'll notice it splits off right here and goes down into this cabinet too, right? And then it comes back in here and goes into this stuff. So it goes from this cabinet into here, and then from this cabinet back into here too. Well, why does it do that? Okay, so if you look, you'll notice that this cabinet has different microphone settings than this cabinet. It uses a different mic, it uses a different filter, it looks like, different high cut, and different levels out. Yeah, and different levels out too, okay? So then each cabinet then goes back from its output and goes into the time delay effect. So it's kind of like having a little loop. Then you get the blend of the speakers into the time-based effects, and then it goes out. And that really kind of starts to show how deep you can get with this. There's a myriad of things. You can put a parallel section of effects right here on this bottom level. It's really, really interesting and can produce a lot of really cool sounds. Going back to this example here, you have your different mics, and there's a ton of different microphones you can use. If you've ever mic cabinets in real life, they're going to be really recognizable names. 121, 57, obviously stuff like that. If not, just play with them. See what sounds cool to you when you move something somewhere else. So, as you can see, like this one is obviously set up to be a complete model. So what if I wanted to do like a 4-cable method? Well, that's where I can go back to mine. We've got our pre's, we got our send, we have our return from the amp. So this is where all the amp action happens, and then it comes back here, and then it goes into these two, which is our time-based effects. And that's one way you would do it if you're doing a 4-cable method, and you put all your time-based stuff on the latter part. If you end up doing a method where you send it out to the return of your amp and you like that, the only thing I would say is do it like a normal preset, like a preset that isn't going to have any kind of amp involvement, like a direct recording one or something like we looked at with the Kali option, which is here, with the Kali rectifier option, okay? But take out the cabinets, okay? Take out both these cabinets. Your own cabinet is going to make sound. Now, can you use the cabinet emulation with that? Sure, but it might sound weird, and it might not sound very natural, and it might sound off. Start with no cabinet, and then experiment with adding cabinets if you want. There's also tons of information online, so I'm not going to get too deep into a lot of this stuff because there's so much you can do with it, and that's not the point of the video. The video is to give you some basic stuff that you can do to get started, but also to explain some of the stuff that I feel like a lot of other videos aren't explaining like concisely and just like, hey, this is what it does. And this is how to make it do what you want it to do. Like I said, I didn't cover IRs in here. IRs are a huge part of getting different sounds, getting specific sounds. I don't use them that much, but that's because I'm using it a different way. I am primarily using it as a platform to record, you know, first takes and things like that, as well as reamping, and then also effects, so I don't have to keep a giant pedal board full of super expensive effects. When I play live, I will use it. I haven't played live since I bought it, but I will use it as in a 4-cable method, probably mostly either as a stompbox for effects or in snapshots that are just basically on-off effects. I guarantee you there'll be parts of songs that I write later that I'll use it heavily in. That's basically it on the basic stuff. The Amazon guy just went by. There are some things I didn't cover in here, like how to assign foot switches and stuff like that. It's actually really easy, and there's tons of other people that have covered it better than me. I just wanted to get together some basic concepts I knew I struggled with, especially like how do I get it into snapshotting mode, and how do I use the 4-cable method, and why is it that way. So hopefully this was helpful. If not, sorry to waste your time, and thank you as always for watching.